Hi, everyone, and welcome to 4Discovery's webinar, Remediating Data the Right Way. I'm Will Riss with 4Discovery, and we appreciate you spending an hour of your day with us. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Chad Gully. Chad is the owner and founder of 4Discovery, a B2B firm specializing in digital forensics and expert testimony services. Chad has over 2 decades of experience successfully providing organizations and attorneys with digital forensics, information security, and electronic discovery services. He's a renowned expert in digital forensics and has been retained as an expert in over 200 cases globally, leading to multiple convictions and settlements. He's a sought-out industry leader to present at digital forensic events and has spoken at multiple national conferences. CNN has featured his work and his expertise, and he served as a technical consultant on the CBS television drama CSI-7. In his free time, Chad is an adjunct professor at DePaul University, where he teaches computer security and forensic investigations. Chad, take it away.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for joining us today to talk about remediating data the right way. If anybody has any questions during this, feel free to pop them in the chat or the Q&A box, and I'll cover them either throughout the presentation or at the end. We'll have some time for some Q&A. I'd like to use this quote by Jack Dorsey recently about the definition of technology, and that it's allows people to do two things. It increases the velocity of their communication, so we're communicating faster and more frequently, and we're also communicating with more and more people. And when it talks about remediating data or data leaving a corporate environment and being placed on other accounts, devices, and computers, that definitely applies today. So a little bit of an agenda, how we got here, how to talk about kind of classifying and identifying some of this data to remediate, a couple different scenarios for different devices where this information can reside, some methods to actually go about remediating the data, talk about protocols a little bit, some improvements and some takeaways and some Q&A. So how did we get here? A while back, we did a CLE on investigating and defending trade secrets, basically how to figure out if corporate data left your environment, how to do the forensics on that for both plaintiff and defendants. And in that presentation, we covered briefly remediation, but it was just basically sort of, a minute or two in one slide. So we're bringing that to the forefront today a little bit to talk more in depth about actually remediating that data. These are situations where the data's left a corporate environment and it's not on that company's control anymore. They're on personal devices that are unmanaged and unsecured. It assumes we've kind of already done the forensics on the theft of the data and we kind of know where those data sources are. And we have a general idea what the difference is between what might be considered confidential or trade secret information versus public or personal information, a public sell sheet or presentation that a company may use that may be disseminated widely, or somebody copying over photos or music files as part of their departure. Also, we'll talk about like the parties and being in agreement about what needs to be remediated and where, because that can be a little bit of a fight as well when we get down to that. So there's a little bit of a data life cycle. Preserving this information from all the different devices and accounts, and then figuring out if any relevant data exists on that, how it may have been used, isolating that confidential information from personal documents or other files, working through a protocol to determine what needs to be deleted, remediated, or returned, and then actually going through and doing the remediation. So let's talk about classification of data. There's a whole arm around information governance. And really, this is a framework for organizations to manage all of their data and information. Very, very few companies actually have the resources or the maturity to actually conduct a full information governance audit. If you do have one of those, it's great from a discovery standpoint because you know where all your records are stored and what your retention policies are. But even if you don't have a full-blown information governance audit, a lot of these informal results can help identify what's confidential and what's not. Are documents stamped as confidential, or they have some other designation on them, for public use, confidential, internal use only. If you have that kind of information on documents, it makes it a lot easier to figure out what may be a confidential or trade secret document versus what may be used for public disclosure. Um, Going back a long ways, when you talk about information security, there's this whole concept of a Bella Pilota model. And this was developed back in 1973. It was primarily done for the military, but it's been military and government, but it's been applied to corporate security as well. And it really incorporates this principle of least privilege. It makes sure that someone who only has access to confidential information can't read top secret information. Um, it makes sure that if you have top secret information, that there's policies or controls in place to make sure that top secret information doesn't get intermingled with public or unclassified information. And this principle of least privilege is really just permissions. Um, who has access to what? I mean, it shouldn't really be situations where everyone in the company has access to all of the documents, right? HR should have access to a different set of documents than sales versus finance. Um, and there should be methods to put in place to make sure that finance documents don't end up in the accounting share or the sales share. But when we think about data exfiltration or employees walking out the door with data or any other scenario where company documents end up somewhere else, it really follows the model of an old school data breach. Think about it as a hack, but done by an internal person. And when you talk about a data breach, there's really three aspects to it. It's really anything that impacts confidentiality, integrity, or availability of data. Availability can come into play if the data wasn't just copied, if it was actually moved, right? Removed from company systems and put on some sort of external storage device. Integrity can come into play if documents were modified in some way after they left the company or the organization. And confidentiality is the big one. You have private trade secret information that the company spent good money protecting and have policies and procedures around it that are now basically out in the wild. And when you deal with a data breach, from an incident response standpoint, there's a whole framework for responding to that. And a lot of that applies to data remediation as well. There's really sort of two goals. And, we like to refer to this as trying to put the cat back in the bag. The goal of remediation should be first containment, making sure that if there is company confidential or corporate information that's out there, it's not continuing to be further accessed or disseminated. So you kind of want to lock it down. The second piece is actually getting it out of there, removing all that confidential data from a public repository and making it reasonably accessible for all of the people that may have potentially had access to it. And remediation comes into play a lot, especially in trade secret cases, because generally companies have a duty to demonstrate that they've taken reasonable methods to protect their trade secrets. They have some security controls in place, they have policies, and if a company's aware that confidential information is outside of their control, it's kind of their duty to make sure that they've at least taken some steps to remove it from those locations and make sure that people still don't have access to it. So how do we go about isolating and identifying some of this stuff? There's a lot of different ways that you can identify information that may have left a company. One simple way is file names, right? Acme sales contract 2022. You can either do that on the patterns of files, so files containing certain names or certain document types, but it's really easy to take a huge list of files that you may be worried about and just see if they exist on any other locations or devices. Another way to do this is by a hash values. So this is where you generate like an MD5 hash, for example, of some source data right? So you go to a company server and maybe I generate just MD5 lists of all the documents on a corporate laptop or a corporate file server. And I take that list of hash values and I can quickly use that to say, do any files anywhere else match this hash value? If it is, it's a one-to-one match. And I know that the file from my source data set of company data also exists on my destination. Date filtering is another way that you can use to identify data. Uh, Often when people copy files, they do so in bulk. And that creates basically a spike in activity during that copy period. If I copy 1,000 files from my computer to a thumb drive, all of those files on the thumb drive are going to have the same creation date, usually within seconds or minutes of each other. So you have a high volume of data that's been copied in one way or another. You can use that information to say what files were created during that time period. You can also use document metadata. So especially for office documents, most of those have an author or an owner or a company associated with internal metadata, dates, last saved. All that internal metadata can be used to filter and find documents that may have belonged to a company, basically the author of the document belonging to Acme Corporation, for example. You can use that to identify documents in bulk. Obviously, you can still keyword search for data. You can use company names, key terms, competitors, whatever that may be, and you can run some searches on those. And if you're worried that documents may have changed, right, something like a hash value match is going to be a one-to-one exact document match. But what if someone took a contract and opened it up and changed the date in it, or changed the recipient party, or maybe changed a logo in a document? That wouldn't be a direct hash match, but near duplicate matching allows you to take that set of source data and then run it across the destination data and say, show me documents that are 75 or 80% similar to my set of source data. So it'll find documents that have slight revisions to it. Contracts are a great example of this because usually contracts all pretty much look the same, just some of the parameters or maybe pricing or who it's for, just slightly different. So if you have one source contract, you can find near duplicates of a ton of other contracts that you may not have information about. There is a question out there already. It's block hashing as a viable means to identify data. That can be used as well. What block hashing does is it essentially takes a file and it divides it up into little chunks, and then each chunk is hashed. And then when you search the destination computer, you basically take the computer and chunk it up and see if any of those chunks match hashes for your source document. Generally, that's a really good way to determine if a document has ever been there. But meaning like if someone had a document and deleted it or did something to it, there'll probably be a block of data somewhere in the computer that might match. But for active files, it's kind of a little overboard and it's not used a ton. But valuing data. So as a general rule of thumb, not all data is created equal. An Excel spreadsheet of your clients probably has a different value than a 5-year strategic plan that might have a different value to something like source code or an engineering document or something that's patented or some secret formula. They all have different values. And there may be scenarios where valuation experts may need to be brought in to kind of determine what the value of the data that's been stolen is worth, how it may have been used, or whether the company may have been enriched by it in some way, used it for a competitive advantage. And if you have high value data that's been used that might have caused a loss to a company, that may impact how you actually go about searching for and remediating data. couple different scenarios to walk through. So once data leaves a protected environment, leaves the company, it ends up in multiple different locations. You can really go down a pretty deep rabbit hole with searching for and deleting every single occurrence of a document that may have existed. It may be just extremely time consuming and prohibitively costly. So what you need to do is utilize computer forensics to let you know where that data went. In order for data to be copied somewhere, you need to have a source and a destination. So you can look at those source devices and figure out what potential destinations may have gone. And then when you look at those destinations again, you can see if the data has basically just been copied and never used, or if that data has been also attached to another computer. If it went to a Gmail account, did it get downloaded? Did it get then synced with Dropbox? Where else might that data reside? And hopefully you run to an endpoint fairly quickly, and you don't have to start searching dozens and dozens of computers. But as we go through these, we'll talk about a couple different sources where we might find data and how to kind of remediate it. Computers are by far the most common, and they're the easiest devices to locate and remediate data from. If you have a desktop or a laptop computer and you're worried that certain files may be on there, it's really easy to hash that and find all the missing hash match files, as well as just search for file names that may exist anywhere on the computer. And this can be scripted as well. So if you have thousands of files that you want to look for, it's not like somebody has to sit there and search for file 1 and then say, nope, didn't find it, search for file 2. We can take these lists of hash values or file names or partial paths and just generate lists and remediate them all in one step. So it can be really quick. Second thing to bring up is how are you going to actually delete the documents? Is it normal deletion or secure deletion? Meaning you're going to use some sort of utility or program to not only delete the data, but overwrite it in some way. Other things to think about, Windows has something called volume shadow copies, and Mac OS has local volume snapshots, or little time machine snapshots that can contain copies of data. So even if I delete everything on the computer from your documents directory, if you have one of these snapshots, it's really easy to just rewind your computer prior to that snapshot and have all the data back. You also have situations where, even if I securely delete a document and get rid of snapshots, there may be a fragment of that document or a copy of that document that can reside in the hard drive's free space. So do we need to basically zero out that hard drive free space as well? And when you're looking at computers, you kind of want to also check operating system artifacts for additional storage locations or evidence of file access. So if you do have a pricing sheet on in the downloads folder on a computer, has that document been opened? Did anybody look at it? Did anybody print it? Is there any evidence that it was uploaded to another cloud storage location or put into a web-based email account? How did that document get on the computer? Did it come from a USB drive or a cloud account? So there's a lot of artifacts on the computer that will not only just let you know the document's there, it'll let you know if anybody interacted with the document or what might have been done with it. Still, portable storage devices, thumb drives, hard drives are the most common places where documents exist. It's still very, very easy for employees to basically just plug in a thumb drive to their computer and back up documents before they resign. When we're looking at USB storage devices, we want to make sure we look at the internal hardware serial number. Won't be printed on the outside of the device, at least not usually, but there are unique serial numbers to those devices. So 2 SanDisk USB thumb drives that look identical will have different hardware internal serial numbers. And we want to match those up to make sure we have the actual right device. When we look at USB storage devices, we also want to check dates and times, as well as a bunch of any other activity on the device. So USB devices by themselves don't really do anything. It's just storage. For any information to be changed on the USB device, it has to be attached to a computer. So if you attach a thumb drive to your, work Windows computer, you're going to have artifacts that it was attached from a Windows computer, and you're going to have dates and times that are modified when people open files or access information from that device. If you take it home and plug it into a Apple device, a MacBook or something like that, you're going to have Mac specific artifacts that are on there that are going to let you know that it was attached to another computer. Generally, when you copy data to a USB drive, the file creation date is when it was created on that USB drive. And then the access date and time is going to be the same as the copy date and time because it wasn't accessed after that initial copy. By comparing the creation and the access times, you'll get information about whether or not anything was done with those files after they were copied. And USB storage drives are cheap. It's a couple bucks for a new storage device. Oftentimes, it's easier to basically just keep the device, even though it may be owned by the custodian, and find any personal information that may be on there. Maybe there's just a couple photos on there or tax returns, and just basically copy their personal information to a new device and return a brand new device to them and kind of just destroy or get rid of the device that's got the confidential information on it. So that's another option as well. Mobile phones can be difficult when they get confidential information on there. There's no way to sort of bulk find and delete information from a mobile device. If you think about text messages that you may have on your phone, if we need to delete certain text messages because they have attachments or confidential information in there, or go through and remove information from the phone's internal storage, the phone really doesn't have a way to say, give me a list of files and search for this. So that often needs to be done manually. And if you do need to do this, you may need to make a forensic image of that mobile device first so we can bulk search the forensic image and see if there are any documents or files that match. If so, we can go back and manually delete just the matches, which are generally much, much smaller on mobile devices than they are on computers. Mobile devices love to sync their data. So if you have Google Drive, iCloud Drive, OneDrive, or any other cloud storage on your device, it may be possible that documents were in OneDrive as well as local on the phone, or may have been saved to a cloud storage provider from that phone. So there may be a cloud aspect to mobile devices as well. Another thing to keep in mind is that mobile devices like to back themselves up, especially Apple iOS devices. On a pretty much daily basis, they will back up their contents to the cloud. And if you delete text messages from a phone, you may have situations where there's a backup of those text messages that may linger out in the cloud for a long period of time. And are you worried about that custodian basically, having everything deleted from their phone, and then right after the deletions, they basically just restore their phone from a prior backup? So do you need to delete that information from the cloud and the backups as well? We can remotely control phones. There are apps out there that'll let us remotely look into a phone. They're typically view only, but it does give us a method to kind of triage that phone. Maybe look in some of these common storage locations just to see if there's actually any data there at all, as opposed to making a full forensic image and searching it. Just looking to see if there's any information on there through a remote session that's view only is a good starting point. Cloud environments. Lots of information is stored in the cloud. Oftentimes, people will just email themselves documents to their Yahoo account, Gmail account, Microsoft accounts. And you may have attachments out there as part of email messages. It's fairly easy to collect an email account or even search email accounts live to see if there are any matching files or documents that are out there. If there are, it's another situation of as long as you collect it properly, bulk remediating those are very, very easy. Basically, when you collect them, you have unique message identifiers that are part of an email account. And when we have a list of, let's say, 1,000 message identifiers, we don't have to manually go through and find and locate and delete 1,000 messages. We can just feed that list of 1,000 identifiers in there, and it will automatically delete all of those messages that may exist in the email account. Cloud storage is something to keep in mind as well. Talk about iCloud, Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox. A lot of those exist and will keep data out there, and it's very simple for employees to log onto their Dropbox account, and instead of dragging and dropping files to a USB drive, they'll drag and drop them to a web browser and upload them to Dropbox. And those can exist in there as well. The audit logs from a lot of the cloud storage services will let you know when documents were uploaded, what other devices may have been connected to that account, as well as whether or not documents have been downloaded, shared, or accessed in some way. So most of these cloud providers do have audit log capabilities to let you know what's been done with the data once it's been placed in there. I like to highlight in Gmail, there's just a button there that says add to drive. Oftentimes we'll run into scenarios where we have documents that were sent to a Gmail account, and they want to collect the Gmail account to see if any of those messages were there, and then also look at the computer to see if any of the attachments were downloaded to the computer. But they leave out the Google Drive piece. It's very simple to just click that Add a Drive button and copy information into Google Drive, which is still part of Google, but it's separate from Gmail itself, where documents could exist. And then last, you have like online messaging platforms, Slack, Teams, and a lot of other instant message platforms that are out there where documents can be placed and then accessed at a later time. All of those can be searched, collected, and looked at through any of those methods. And remember that cloud accounts do have the ability to restore deleted data for a period of time. So in Dropbox, even if I delete all of the files and they go to a temporary trash and I empty out the temporary trash, there usually is a period of time where you can rewind that account. If that's an issue, right, normally you have to sort of trust that the custodian is going to cooperate as part of this remediation, but if that's an issue, you may want to keep access to that account for a period of time. There are ways, even with Gmail, both personal and the business end of that, where you can place a request with Google and they might recover up to 30 days worth of permanently deleted Gmail messages. So those are options. If you have a rather brave or brazen custodian that's determined to have access to this data, if it's in a cloud environment, there might be methods that they can use to get that back even after it's been deleted. And that's kind of just out of the control of everyone except for the provider. When data starts to make its way to a corporate network, it tends to replicate really quickly. If a confidential pricing sheet is forwarded or sent to a few people at a company, you end up running into the situation where that email is then forwarded to other people in the company. Recipients of that email are downloading those attachments to their desktops or laptops. Some of those downloads are being synced to the cloud. Some of those are being copied over to shared file servers. You might have situations where you have a customer list that might have been uploaded to the new company's CRM platform, right? Your client list was uploaded into the competitor's Salesforce instance. And you might have information stored in different systems on that company. So lots of things to kind of look at when you're dealing with data that might have gotten into a corporate environment. Also, remember, corporate systems are usually backed up. Companies have backup and retention policies. So if you do have situations where there's information you're remediating from a competitor, you want to ask about their backup and retention policies. And you want to put something in place that says they're not going to just back up or restore documents or systems after they've been remediated in some way. So some methods of remediation. How do we go about doing this? One option is to basically just take ownership of the device or account. We've had several scenarios where there's just been a ton of information on a laptop, and the custodian's like, you know what, that laptop's 5 years old. I don't even care about it anymore. The only thing that's on there is my iPhoto library that's got my kids on it. Just give me my iPhoto library. You can have the whole computer. Or I don't even care about that thumb drive anymore. I just use that thumb drive to copy information over, and if there is personal stuff on it, I don't care about it. You can just have it. There are methods for selectively deleting the confidential files, right? File list, hash values, search terms, and then using that sort of find, search, and destroy method to delete and overwrite that data. We talked about the option of just returning personal information. If it's been intermingled with company data, you can keep the whole device and all the company data and just return personal info. And one of the things that comes up a lot is, when you get access to a device or an account, then you kind of have to search it and find all the data. You generally make some lists of files that are responsive. They get agreed upon, and then we go in and actually delete the information from the device. That takes a little bit of time, but what happens to the device or that account during that time period? So if there's documents in a Gmail account and we know we forwarded them to their Gmail account, we're going to collect it, search it, come up with a list of messages that contain confidential information and delete it. Is the custodian allowed to access that Gmail account during that time period? Are you going to take their access away? Or are you going to kind of trust that after it's been collected, they're not forwarding data somewhere else? Or we've imaged a computer and we're looking to remediate or delete data from there. And then after we've imaged the computer, they're plugging in thumb drives and deleting or moving data around. So those are all things to kind of worry about as far as whether or not you're going to trust or allow this custodian access to devices that contain confidential information while this remediation is occurring. The protocol. Whenever it comes down to actually going through and identifying and deleting information, a written protocol that all parties agree to in advance is going to be the best option. There have been a lot of scenarios where we've been asked to remediate data very early in the matter. Something as simple as, yes, this client admits to copying a folder from his work computer to a personal Google Drive account. We want you to go in and find that folder on Google Drive and just delete it. We've done that, and then that hasn't really worked out well for the client in some ways because the opposing party wasn't in agreement. This being done in advance. They want to know additional questions. So put a remediation protocol in place, and there's a good kind of outline for that. It's getting a list of devices or accounts that need to be considered and inspected. The custodian can come up with this list. It may be a list that's been generated through forensic analysis because we know certain devices or accounts were destinations for exfiltrated or copied information. And how far are you going to go? There may be situations where they primarily use a laptop computer, but the family also has a family computer in the living room. Are we looking at those? I've had remediation protocols that have actually looked at like every device in a household, the spouse's device, the kids' devices. What's going to be in scope when we're actually looking at these devices? Usually some sort of exhibit or some sort of parameters for identifying what's going to be considered confidential. It could be a list of file names, hash values, search terms that we're going to look for, dates and times. Anything that we're going to use to basically figure out how to find the needle in the haystack, the company information from all the other personal information that may exist. Go through a step of preserving these devices and accounts, making those forensic forensic image, or at least preserving that before any remediation is done. We use that list of file names or hash values or search terms to filter all the collected data and say, okay, here's what we found on these devices that match this criteria. Could be by hash, could be by file name, could be by fuzzy matching, but here's what matches. We provide these lists to all parties to review, and generally that will become the list of files that are going to be remediated. Should also probably have a section in there to say, look, we're not going to do full forensics on phones and laptops that are being turned over. We're at least going to take a peek to look to see if there are any additional copies that were made or anything that might have synced somewhere else. If we get someone's personal laptop and we run a list of file names and we find those and they're in a Dropbox folder, well, we're pretty sure that they're also going to be up in Dropbox on the cloud. So at least a cursory look for additional information, additional USB devices that may have been attached to the computer where data could reside that might point us somewhere else that additional copies were made and this isn't the only device we need to look at. Then it goes through and just basically performs the deletions or remediation. And how are we going to do that? What methods? How far are we going to go? Are we going to delete the backups? Are we going to delete the free space? Are we going to zero things out? How much are we going to actually remediate from the computer as far as artifacts that may exist that could be recovered in some way? And then what are we going to do with the data afterwards? Who gets what data back? Generally, anything that's been remediated will go back to the plaintiff's party. But generally, you want to keep that for a period of time because as we talk about the remediation protocol and some of the certifications, if that employee or that former employee or custodian is found to have additional data or additional documents, and they're continuing to use those, knowing what they had access to in the first place is generally a help. And that brings us into the settlement agreement portion of things. So get affidavits and certifications. If we forensically go through and search and remediate data, that should come with some sort of letter, affidavit, certifying what was remediated, from where and when. So lists of files that were remediated, which device it came from, where they were stored, all the different dates and times, and how we went about deleting that information. What exact steps and tools and process did we use for those deletions? That should come from the vendor or whoever actually does the remediation. And then you generally want something from the custodian, like an affidavit, saying that I'm not hiding the ball. There are no additional copies that exists. Something that says they won't take any extraordinary means to recover, destroy, or recover any of that data that's been remediated, right? They're not going to take their laptop and send it to a data recovery shop to carve back out deleted files, or they're not going to take any of that cloud information and place a request into Google or Dropbox to recover data that's been deleted less than 30 days ago. And then part of that, at least the affidavit or the settlement agreement should cover what happens if a custodian is found using that data, or is it basically in violation of that at a future date. So a couple key takeaways. Once we remediate data and delete it, it's gone. So preserve before you actually remediate data. There are often scenarios where data might be over-remediated. There might be questions with, did this person have access to this file? Did they use it? what were the dates associated with it? The company doesn't have a copy of it anymore. Maybe they want to know specifically what was in that copy that the employee had. So forensically preserve it so you can go back to and refer to it. Because once you've remediated it, there's no easy way to get it back and recover it if there's any way to at all. And then know in advance, based off the data that was taken, what you're trying to remediate, what the value of that is, how far down the rabbit hole you need to go, and what does good enough look like. I have seen scenarios where data was placed on a file server and the company was backing that up on a nightly basis. There have been situations where the company's backups were actually taken from the company and put with a third party for a period of time to make sure the company didn't have a catastrophic event and need to restore them. But then those backup tapes need to be wiped before they were returned because they didn't even want the company to be in possession of like a backup of this that they might actually restore. So how far down that rabbit hole you're going to need to go. Reminder to use a lot of the forensic artifacts that tell you what was done with the data and how it was used after it was first copied. Best case scenario, someone copied a bunch of company documents to a thumb drive and then just left the thumb drive in a desk drawer and never attached to another computer, didn't open anything, didn't upload anything to any other accounts. Best case scenario. Worst case scenario is they plugged into their new employer's computer and copied it to that desktop, and the desktop got backed up and it was emailed around, and now there's 50 different locations that we actually need to go through and look at to find copies of this data. You could spend hours and hours and thousands of dollars tracking down one Excel spreadsheet that's been sent around to a bunch of different people. What's the value of that spreadsheet? What are you really trying to do as far as remediating that and making sure no one has access to it? Using that remediation protocol to keep everybody on the same page. We don't want to be remediating data if someone wants to actually collect and inspect it at a later time. Making sure that everybody's on the same page before we go through and start deleting documents and data. And then getting those certifications from both the person that did the remediation as well as the custodian as well. Making sure that, in addition to going through the exercise of seeking this data out, locating it, and deleting it, they're also going to certify that there's no additional copies around, and they're not going to go through any extreme or extraordinary means to try to recover any of that data. Summary, this recording and webinar will provide a link to this. We'll put it up on, I think, YouTube so that we can view it at a later time if there are questions or anything you want to look at in here. Copy of the slide deck will be sent to everybody. We also have a cheat sheet or a little document that we're going to provide on remediating data that you'll get after this presentation. That'll give you some of the key steps to take to refer to at a later time. And I think we'll open it up for Q&A.
Perfect. Thanks, Chad. We've had a couple come in. We'll answer those. And just a quick reminder that the Q&A section or the Q&A section of Zoom is anonymous. If there's any additional questions that you don't want to ask in this forum, we're happy to address those afterwards. First one, how many times do you need to overwrite data?
Great question. So there's the 35 pass overwrite, 7 pass, DoD method for overwriting data, and I've seen that come up in a lot of different requests and protocols as well. The real answer is once. If you overwrite a file or a hard drive with zeros one time, there has yet to been a scenario where anybody's been able to recover data from a modern day device that's been overwritten once. That applies specifically even more so with solid state drives that are in most computers these days. So a single overwrite renders that unrecoverable.
All right. There may be a little bit of nuance to this, but the question is, how long does remediating data take based on the location? And I'm guessing location is device or account.
Yeah, it can vary. Really, it's the actual remediation on a desktop or laptop computer can be as little as an hour because we know the file names and everything that we're actually going through, and we can automate that. We don't have to go through and look for 1,000 or 10,000 files one at a time. Email accounts, I mentioned will have unique message IDs. That can be done in very, very little time as well. Mobile devices actually take the longest because there's no easy way to bulk search phones. And text messages are stored in databases, for example. So deleting individual text messages or individual records from the phone is just time consuming because we can't just go in and delete all of your text messages. They're all stored in a single database.
Okay, the next one is, do you delete ESI for cases that you haven't been actively involved with?
We do. Certainly, we've been asked in the past to basically just go through and, like I mentioned, delete this one folder out of a Google Drive account or something. Uh, you know, I'll caution people that it's always good to make sure that both parties are in agreement and both parties are aware that this remediation step is occurring and that everybody's signed off on it. Because once we remediate the data from a Google Drive account, there's generally no real easy way to get that back. And then if a company or the opposing party wants to actually know what those files were, or they want to inspect those files at a later date, that can cause an issue. So,
Okay. Ethically speaking, records that will exist electronically only with company that created the program, but will not have access from our company computers, will this be okay slash count as deleted?
let me try to read into that a little bit. I'm not sure I quite understand that question. I think it's referring to like if records may exist somewhere, but nobody has access to them. Does that still kind of count as deleted? Um, not really sure.
Okay. Well, for the person who asked that question, I'll provide a private answer with a link to chat email if you want to, this phone number if you want to reach out to him directly to provide contact. If there was a data breach with the company whose program we use and they still have existing records, do we have to notify clients on?
Um, typically, yes, right? So if you're using and storing information with a vendor, and that vendor suffers a data breach, and the information that you have with that vendor gets lost in some way, um, generally you will have to notify. It varies by state, and it varies based on the type of information that may have been exposed. But generally, you will have to do notifications to your clients or customers um, that information's been breached in some way. A good example that was on the news, I think, fairly recently, is T-Mobile had a data breach. But if you read into it a little bit, it wasn't T-Mobile that had a data breach. T-Mobile was storing some data with, I believe it was Equifax or Experian, and they actually had the data breach, but it was T-Mobile's data through Equifax. But that still caused T-Mobile to do the notifications on that.
Okay, and we just have a couple of more. If a file is airdropped from a MacBook to an iPhone, does that leave a trace?
It certainly will on both the MacBook and the iPhone. It's a situation where um, looking at those artifacts, evidence of copying, those sources and destinations comes into play when you're looking for that data transfer.
Okay, and finally, how do you handle situations where custodian needs something back after remediation? Something, assuming here that is data.
Yes. That does come up occasionally, and that's, think of a scenario where, uh, we've been asked to look for any emails from a company account to a personal Gmail account. So somebody that sent themselves something, and find and remediate those. So, we'll go through and um, do a to from search and come back with a list of messages and then go through and delete them. We'll, at a later time, maybe they sent themselves some receipts, or maybe they sent themselves a tax return or some other personal document that was completely not company related that they actually need access to. Um, and that's why I do recommend, especially even keyword searching computers. One of the common things that comes up are resumes or tax returns or investment statements that have a company name in them. Um, if those get missed as part of that review process and they get remediated inadvertently, that custodian may need that information back. And that's why it's always a good idea to preserve information before you go through and remediate. In the event that we actually did delete something that was extremely important that fell through the protocol, we can, as a one-off, go back and pull that information back out and send it to them.
And Chad, the individual who would ask the ethical question has raised their hand, so I will allow them to.
Sure.
It looks like they are still muted.
Got it.
We'll give them another second or two, because we're waiting for that. Just one more piece of housekeeping. As Chad mentioned, a follow-up email with the materials from today's webinar will arrive in your inbox before the end of the week. For participants that submitted their Illinois bar number during registration, your CLE attendance certificate will be sent out before the end of the week as well.
All right, thanks everybody. Thanks for attending. Again, if there are any follow-up questions or something I didn't cover, feel free to reach out via email or phone. Be happy to answer them. Sorry about the one that was online. I just that might require a little back and forth on the question to get a good answer for you.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for attending. We hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.